being a high energy kid, this slowed me down and put me in the moment. So it fit being in nature, being in the moment. And that's really my central theme with photography. Why do we do it? Is to be out there and be in the moment with what we're doing.
Oh boy, do we have another great episode, a great guest. Welcome back to the Wild Photographer, friends. My guest today is Ralph Lee Hopkins, a National Geographic photo instructor and what I would call kind of a celebrity photo guide in the world of guided photo expeditions. I shouldn't say kinda, he truly is the real deal. I've known Ralph for quite some time, and I'm a huge admirer of not just his photography, which is spectacular, but really how he crafted his career and his positions in the adventure travel space to truly make a career out of traveling to the ends of the earth and teaching photography in doing so. We cover a lot today, including how his mantra is light composition moment. That's a really why it's important to photograph what you know to begin a successful nature photography career, the business of photography, especially as it pertains to travel and travel photography. Some great career advice for budding photographers, tips for photography on ship-based expeditions, some great tips for organizing photos in Lightroom, and especially the importance of collections, also the importance of working, and also why overexposing can actually be your best friend when preserving colors in your photography. That and so much more. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Ralph, it's this one's been a long time coming, but welcome to the podcast.
Great to see you, Court, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, happy New Year to you too. So I'm going to start off with a question. I haven't asked this as the intro question to any other guest yet, but what draws you to photography? You've had an amazing, illustrious career that spanned decades, and you're clearly an artist. I've seen your work in many different ways, including in your home, on your wall, from travel catalogs and magazines. What kind of continues to draw you to photography or drew you in the first place? Like, what is it about photography to Ralph Lee Hopkins?
Well, that's a really good question because what drew me to photography was my background in geology. And when I first went west, I grew up back east in New York. I had seen the Grand Canyon on the one out west trip we did. And I was an outdoor kid, but after I had my geology degree and I went out and visited the red rocks of Utah with a camera, that changed everything. Seeing actually, it wasn't even the marquee place. It was Capitol Reef National Park, the tilted rock layers there. I just got totally into it. So my girlfriend at the time, we figured out a way to get back out west, and we got out to Richfield, Utah, central Utah, not far from Capitol Reef, Bryce Canyon, and worked for the Forest Service. So I really honed my skills while I was building fence as a 22-year-old. And so being very visual, being interested in geology, and then, wildlife would just show up. So you'd shoot what was there. One of the lessons from that is shoot what you know. And then I fell into getting a 4x5 camera. So I taught myself a large format. And I'd go backpacking for a week and take 10 sheets of film because that's all I could afford. Uh, and so I learned composition with this large format camera and carrying around a tripod. And so that it was a process for me. And it was something that, being a high energy kid, this slowed me down and put me in the moment. So it fit being in nature, being in the moment. And that's really my central theme with photography. Why do we do it? Is to be out there and be in the moment with what we're doing. At least in nature photography, sports and editorial or even war photography is a totally different game. For me, it's being outside and being in nature.
Yeah, and I love to hear you say that too because I feel like there's a lot going around today where people are almost on the other side of the fence and saying, well, you gotta put the camera down every once in a while. You gotta be in the moment and not make it all about photography. And I feel pretty vehemently that, at least for myself, that photography is what gets me in the moment. It's what puts me there. And yes, you get these wonderful making memories things, but to hear you with your venerable career to say that right off the bat, it's inspiring and a good reminder that no, if you do it right and you are just, well, borderline obsessed with photography, like I know we both are, and like many of the audience are, photography can actually be the tool to actually get you to stay and be in that moment and to appreciate things on a deeper, much deeper level?
You've gotta know your camera. You gotta know your equipment, and that's why the iPhone and, when I say iPhone, I mean all smartphones, but since Apple invented it, um, I say iPhone. It's best. Um, is leveled the playing field because it is putting you in the moment, and I fight that same battle. Put your camera down and and when people say this, say, "Yeah, I'll put my camera down, be in the moment, but after I got the shot." You know, when you see something, you're just driven to it, and there's something neurological that does happen. This has been shown to be true when you look and we're different people, than what I say normal people, because we're out there and no longer is it, "Okay, it's a beautiful sunset." It's like, "Okay, what's the angle? What can be foreground? Are there clouds? Do I wait for the light?" You know, the mantra is light, composition, moment, and, anything's gonna look good in beautiful light, making pleasing composition, and if there's a moment there that, that's what keeps you there, and there's times when you don't know if you're wasting your time or not, but just putting down the camera and looking at it, that's okay and being there, but I think for us, and I think that's why people, you get in a group that loves to travel that way, is that, yeah, being in the moment with your camera, that's what we do, and it's also very healing. You can use photography to treat PTSD and things like that. Because when you were there looking at that flower, trying to line it up and watch the background and then check your settings, you're not thinking about anything else that's bothering you in your life, any traumas that you have, even the pain of kneeling down. Sometimes you forget about it until you've made your picture.
It's that flow state. I was talking with a previous guest, Will Patino, and he came out of the gates with that too. And it is, it's hard to get into flow state. If folks haven't heard of it, there's some great, great books on it, short summary books and long peer reviewed article type books. And it's not everything gets you there, but it's cool when you find that. And I'm glad to hear that. What I can surmise is that it also gets you into that flow state. My next question is, well, it's a little bit of a selfish one, but I feel like sometimes the selfish questions are good ones for everybody else because I'm sure I'm not the only one thinking about it. But so you're a photo guide. You have been a photo guide for many many years, and to be totally honest, you're a bit of a celebrity photo guide. Not a bit, but you are a genuine celebrity photo guide. People will seek out your departures. They will travel with you. They will follow you to the ends of the earth, quite literally in many cases. And I'm wondering, when you have like intermediate photographers on a trip, people that they know their way around the camera. They may not be 10 out of 10 completely versed in their camera settings or their camera's menu systems, but they get photography. Like they've heard the rule of thirds 11 times. Um, how do you approach that when you have people that really kind of know the core of photography? There's always room to grow, but what are some of the lessons and teachings that you might come out of the gates with for folks that aren't going to necessarily benefit from the real basic rules, but you're kind of starting at an elevated level? What sort of talks might be around that?
The challenge is to get people to see it in a new way. So for an intermediate photographer that doesn't have as much experience, or anyone really is learning, and this you learn over time, is how does the camera see the world? If you go out and look for northern lights, your eye can't collect the light for 5, 6, 7 seconds to see a really dim northern lights, but oh my God, my iPhone got it right on a 10-second setting. So learning how your camera sees, and then once you understand that, it's a new way of looking at the world, and then also the reviewing the compositional things that you can do, and techniques in the moment. If you have a lizard on a log, you can take a beautiful picture of a lizard on a log, but if you get back a little bit and zoom in and blur leaves around the lizard on the log and make it kind of a frame, you're taking it to the next level. And then the other thing is tweaking compositions while you're there. And the thing about digital is it's unlimited, you know? The magic of digital is the joy of digital is it's unlimited. The curse of digital is it's unlimited, and then you have to try to sort through all those pictures. So the other thing I try to get people to do and is to shoot in sequences. You know, if you've got a great subject over here, photograph that till you're done with it, and then go to the next thing. But and then when you're editing, you have this sequence. Oh yeah, I was working on the flower, and I remember that I played with the background and then finally got it, and then you're there. So knowing what works with your camera, really watching the light, and then again having that in your head light composition moment. Yeah, you just want to work it. And I think there's a misconception that the pro can walk up and just kneel down, make the picture. Oh yeah, I got it, and then go on to the next thing. If anything, we're more paranoid that we're missing the moment, and that why didn't I do that last thing, or I didn't realize there was a distraction or a hot spot. Um, so especially with wildlife, that's the other thing is it's the exposure. The monkey in the tree against the white background. I mean, how do you shoot that? And you're really breaking all the rules of shooting because you just blast out the background and make sure you can read the animal.
So you mentioned light a couple times, and I think we all know good light when we see it. Like, oh, that's nice light, and we might, as we get more versed into photography, be able to recognize it when it peeks through the clouds or anything like that. Like kind of a moment of nicer light. But how do you harness light in your photography? Is that as simple as prioritizing a certain time of day? Is it just your acuity for finding good light? Is it the fact that you're angling or pivoting around a subject or moving around a scene to get certain angles of light? Like how do you best deal with light
That is an open question,
for the next 4 hours?
and and I, we borrow sayings from all the previous photographers, and I don't know who said this one, but any light is good light. Let's take harsh light. I mean, you're at the Grand Canyon, and it's even a little hazy, and but you take your long lens and find repeating ridges and underexpose it, and you got this kind of misty, contrasty scene, and then you convert it to black and white later, but you're thinking about it, and you know, it's art if it's black and white, right? It's a masterpiece. It's not what your eye sees. So, I mean, that's using contrasty light. Or if it's just, you know, normal people that come out, oh, it's a perfect day. There's not a cloud in the sky. And all of photography, oh my God, there's not a cloud in the sky. Well, you can use the sun. You can make, one of my jokes in photography, just because I do it so much when you don't have anything really, is the starburst. So if the sun's out and it's crystal clear, you find something to pitch the sun, a tree, and use, have an interesting background or an interesting pattern, and you can deal with it that way. Cloudy light, so so you want to tone what you're doing to, or aim, or focus, for a pun, what you're doing on what the light's giving you. Bright, cloudy, overcast days are great days for saturating colors, shooting portraits, shooting close-ups, but I'm not gonna include a big blank sky. I'll minimize the sky, if there's really good foreground. Dealing with light on going back to the contrasty days, one of the best pieces of equipment is to have a little diffusion disk you can pop out and make, and I call it the portable cloud. So if you have a beautiful detail, or use your own shadow, there's ways of blocking the sun. And like you say, working around, if you can move around the subject, then you can shoot it back, but you can shoot it sidelit. If you always have your shadow in the way, you're shooting something frontlit. There's a problem there, unless you want to include your shadow. So I think that comes from experience and looking at other people's work. Out, why is that such a compelling shot? And I haven't even talked about getting out early and staying out late. Of course, you want to do that, especially with scenics, and especially for wildlife, because they're more active early and late in the day. Um, so my name's Ralph, and I'm more of a sunset photographer, but if I know there's images out there, I'll get up early every day. But getting the low light and then shooting, and that's the other thing that's, I would say, separates the advanced amateur and the pro, is staying out after the sun's down. Most people leave the rim of the Grand Canyon once the sun goes down, and they took their image. That low light, that pre-dawn light, the blue hour, where even on a cloudy, rainy day, if you shoot early and late, you get a blue sky, with clouds even. Um, so shooting past and shooting into the really low light situations can really define your work. And getting out in bad weather. If you want to distinguish yourself as a photographer anywhere, go shoot in bad weather when storms break or when it snows or raindrops on this and that. Yeah, that takes it to the next level.
I think it's an excellent point, the bad weather thing, because I think a lot of photography, especially today, where we're all quite inundated with photography, to be totally honest. Like we're seeing a lot of photography. We're seeing a lot of really good photography. But photography, at least to me, is at least maybe like the business or the prowess of photography, and we're going more and more in this direction, is seeing something and capturing something that not a lot of other people see. And a great way to do that, when are not a lot of people out looking at things with their own two eyes in really crazy weather? When are not a
Mhm.
lot of other photographers capturing XYZ in really harsh, uncomfortable conditions? And so, yeah, it is harsh. It can probably be unpleasant. You could be cold, or you could be really hot, or you could be frostbitten, you could be wind bitten, whatever. But that's a really cool tip because if you're trying to set yourself apart, which I think is definitely a goal of many photographers to do something different to capture and draw that attention from the public at large, photograph something, maybe a familiar object, but at a time of day when not a lot of other people see it. And when I say time of day, I really mean environmental conditions, gnarly weather. So that's a great one.
Yeah,
Mm.
just to follow up on that for a second, the first picture I ever had published was from Bryce Canyon. I mean, I'd taken like 25 pictures with my 4 by 5, and it was in the winter. I was freezing, camping my Volkswagen van illegally at the at the overlook because it was like 2 feet of snow and almost dropped my camera off the cliff. So, yeah, being out
Oh
there,
no.
bad
Yep.
weather.
Do you have a specific time of day that you like best for photography?
Mm. Oh, I do. I mean, the fact that I said I'm more of a sunset photographer, I love being out early in the day and then late in the day and just lingering and finding a spot, and yeah, so it's usually early late in the day for
The
sure.
the good old classic golden hours.
Yeah, and it may not even be for the sunset, it's just 'cause a great time to be out, checking on what's happened that day or look forward to the next day, and again, the low light. Even if there's not good light, you have low light that everything balances, that's the thing. The sun goes down the horizon, you've got the earth shadow, and you start getting magentas. If you can find a colorful foreground or an interesting foreground, and then let the shutter be open. I mean, there's times when you want to shoot a longer shutter speed, not necessarily because you're going for more depth of field, but just so you gather more light. And those subtle hues that come in that people say, "Oh, that doesn't look real." Well, it's true. Your eye doesn't gather all that magenta, over 5 seconds. So it does look different. Belvia got there, by cheating with the saturation to do that, and now with digital, you still have to start out with a good, sharp, well-exposed image. I mean, people say, "Oh, you can just fix it in Lightroom." Well, yeah, but it's still gotta be a good picture.
So you've struck this amazing balance in the kind of business of photography to not just produce amazing fine art images and just high quality, incredibly beautiful shots, but you've also worked it so that you can basically create very useful material, very useful photos for travel companies. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that balance in your work. So you're out in nature or you're wherever you're intended to be and you're seeing beautiful stuff. And the reality is you at least in my mind, you kind of have to pick one or the other. I'm either getting a really useful shot for, let's just say for the audience for like stock photography or for backgrounds of Zoom or PowerPoint presentations, or you're creating some real deal, compelling, captivating art. So this is sort of an open-ended question, but I'm just curious how you have walked up on those scenes and how you've kind of walked up on your photographic career looking at both because again you are known for not just the high quality mesmerizing images but also getting great travel type shots, experiential storytelling kind of shots. There might be an overlap in the Venn diagram. Those might be two different types of shots or 19 different types of shots. But again, as someone who has really bridged that gap extremely well, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that world.
Yeah, another great and open-ended question, but it does fit me because, I mean, to be a photographer now, you to be a successful photographer and make money now, I mean, you've gotta be teaching pretty much, and there are some magazines and there still are photographers that can, make it on assignments, but you need multiple revenue streams, so I always thought of it that way. I didn't think photography was gonna be my career or travel was gonna be my career, I fell into it. I started out working as a geologist, and I was photographing, what I knew. So photographing what you know, and then starting locally. I think a lot of photographers say, "Oh, I want to be a travel photographer and go around the world." Well, yeah, but you've got to start locally, um, and you've got to adopt a project, something that you're really interested in. For me, it started out with landscapes with the big camera, and then I fell into, well, I had two colleagues that worked with back then special expeditions in the late '80s, and they were desperate for a geologist to go to Baja. And I had been to Baja because, I knew some of the geology of Baja. So that combining, so didn't start out in the travel as the photographer. I was a geologist talking about geology. That led to travel and photography go together. It was harder back then because it was film. It was harder to teach, when you're traveling with people. So, because you couldn't see the results. In a way, that was really blissful because you shoot all these photos and you never knew what you had, and then you came back and it was magic. Now it's all real time. So the guiding was a very natural way of traveling. And then when I was, I did a couple of books, Hiking Colorado's Geology, Hiking the Southwest Geology, where I was off on my own. So photography can be a lonely pursuit. So I really, even though I'm an introvert, I really liked being with groups of people, like-minded people, in those amazing places. And so you're having these once in a lifetime experiences of people over and over, different people, but the groups that we had, it started to be 40, 50% repeats. Half the ship had traveled with you before. And my first when you look back at it and things make sense, 1990 is when I went on the ship with Lindblad Expeditions. 1990 was when I had my first image published with National Geographic in a book on actually the Guadalupe Mountains in Texas. It was on national parks, and then there was others on the Grand Canyon. So those are kind of my photographic homes. So things collided without me really knowing it, and so now I'm guiding trips, and then became expedition leader, and started crafting the trip. So we'd be out early. We'd be on the right side of the island with the ship at sunrise. And that led into starting photo expeditions. And so we were one of the first companies with ships to say, this is going to be a photo expedition. So that was something new because back then no one knew about Svalbard. Climate change wasn't on, the ozone hole was on everyone's mind, but not climate change. And so, the things came together in that way that I had a built-in market. So now I have Lindblad, and then I would think about stories and look at magazines and submit. So I was always, when I wasn't on a trip, I was back. Well, when it was film, you had to go through all the, you had to process, go through it, label it, send it out. So I was always on the way to the airport. I was dropping off, 5, 10 packages in FedEx, and going out and shooting more images. And then, digital came along. And digital is what again, it was the leveled the playing field, because everyone then could shoot and look at their images, but they had to learn how to do it, So it changed where we're not only making the pictures, but we're the processing lab, and they have to be almost camera ready when you send them to publisher. So and it's a long-winded answer, but it all came together that then there's teaching digital, there's photographing, there's doing little stories, and I didn't like assignments. I had a couple of early assignments, and I actually had a book project with Nat Geo that I walked away from because it just became the the deadline pressure didn't make for me, it didn't make it fun, especially when it was film and you didn't know what you were getting, and you're sending off all your stuff and then getting criticized, and you hadn't even seen your pictures yet. "Oh, you should have shot more of that." I'm like, "Oh." Yeah, anyway. All the assignment photographers, I'm sure, know that. So I did have a couple of stories published, but the ones that I was really passionate about, and I would have done it even if, they weren't gonna publish it. So having a story that's meaningful to you and can make a difference somewhere, it could be just the changes in your own hometown, gets you started along that road, making impactful images, and then shooting stuff that's not always pretty too. That's important to tell stories.
Right. I mean, that's a huge part of it. It's kind of the intersection of documenting and creating something beautiful out of it, right? How, like, are there certain ingredients that you like to look for and like to capture when you're thinking about that storytelling photography, specifically for when your photos are used in the media. I've seen so many of your photos in travel catalogs and brochures and websites, and you're documenting these incredible experiences of people paddleboarding in Polynesia, and you're photographing other photographers on the island of South Georgia and the subantarctic islands. Is there any sort of thought process or wish list you have in mind, and maybe even techniques that go along with it to prioritize and capture those types of useful photos?
Yeah, and it is they are diametrically opposed in a little bit, telling a story, let's say, about the natural history of a place, from the beauty aspects and getting the animals in the good light and whales jumping and good backgrounds, versus when it's a brochure or or for a travel magazine where you're trying to set a scene like you wanna be there. You have to force yourself to include people. And then if it's gonna be, especially for travel magazines or more importantly for brochures, they need to be well-dressed people, that look the part, they're out there traveling and that has very, very good at that, they have their logo on the back of their jackets. Why is that? Because it's a great shot to shoot from behind using people's heads when there's a bear in front of them, and, it's good marketing. Now for the stock industry and things and other uses, you can't have logos. You don't wanna have logos because it limits the use, so you either remove them by the magic of digital or avoid sending in those kind of shots. So, there's a lot of people that don't wanna have people in their pictures, all the red coats on the beach. Well, you don't wanna have, 30 red coats looking at one penguin, but having 2 red coats walking up a ridge towards the penguins with the mountains in the background, and good light. It creates a moment. So that's, the differentiator. I was probably criticized with the National Geographic because some said, well, your images are too perfect. You need to be more edgy. I'm not a perfectionist. I just like it when it's perfect. I like good compositions. I don't like distractions. I won't remove them. So it's interesting. Sometimes you look at some of the pictures that are published, and it's like, well, why is that stick there? Well, the stick was there. And the fact that it is there kinda says, well, the photographer left it there on purpose after the fact now, um, because it's a slippery slope when you start manufacturing your images rather than capturing images, making it. We say not taking pictures, we like to say making pictures because 'cause you're thinking about it. So thoughtful compositions, and then for catalogs, you gotta leave space. Everybody wants tight, and there is a time to have tight. And so I'd shoot it every which way. And of one situation, I might send 10 near frames of the same shot, but one's horizontal really wide. It has the subject way off to the left so there can be a gutter and you can have Sven's or Ben's letter on the right, the guests, leaving lots of blank sky, shooting it looser. Cropping is not illegal, as I would say in my workshop. Some photographers back in the day shooting 35 millimeter, they would frame it so carefully that the editors couldn't cut the picture, and that's different when it's storytelling, and it's your look, and it's your style, but for useful images, the printed page and everyone started changing when the iPhone came out because, "Oh, now you have the tablet and you can see everything. There's no gutter." The gutter kills so many pictures, and editors still put the wrong picture, for the two-page spread with the gutter going right through the moose or whatever. So half and half. And I get criticized in my own workshops when I show some my students the picture. Okay, analyze this picture. So why? It's almost like two pictures. The moose is on the left, but the trees on the way far on the right. Why did you shoot that way? And I said, that's again going back to the style for the printed page, or so that graphics or a graphic designer, giving them lots of choices is the key in that, but not over flooding it. I mean, you dilute your own work by showing too many of the same images because it just says that you don't know what's your best image, you don't know which one's the one.
Yeah, that's a great point.
S
It is a hard balance because, yeah, you don't wanna give the paradox a choice. You wanna kinda be the educated professional there and submit what you think and what you know to be the best, but you do wanna provide options. Yeah, that's why I've always just loved the increase in resolution in photos, and even with the advent of sharper lenses, I might resign myself to a 70 to 200 for an entire day of wildlife photography because I know that especially for thumbnails on a website or for a social media post, you can always crop in, and as long as you have a good camera and a good lens with that good sensor, you're going to be able to crop in gosh, 30%, maybe even more. So yeah, really, really interesting feedback on that. So I'm gonna ask kind of one final question on the sort of the business of photography because I know that you've seen a lot of transitions and a lot of evolution over the years, and you've kind of answered this. But I'm gonna ask the whole question just as I planned it, just to see what other directions we might go. But what does it take to be successful with photography in today's day and age? And has it changed over the years? And maybe more importantly, because we've kind of covered that, but feel free to, start from whatever direction you want. More importantly, where do you think it's going? Where do you think the business of photography is going, starting in 2026 and beyond?
I'm going to start out by saying I don't know what it takes now to be successful. Being in my retired rewirement mode of still traveling, but not not submitting as much and working on my own projects. And then the other thing is where is it going? We're sitting in this AI time where you really can't. You have to know whether it's AI or not because it's so good. You know, people, carrying polar bear cubs around. And what you're seeing online. So I still think it comes back to fundamentals, and that is to be successful as a photographer, you got to live the life of a photographer.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show. I want to take a moment and talk about something that's been a total game changer for me in my photography. It is my art storefronts website. Let's be honest, selling art, selling photos, especially online, can be really quite challenging. You've got the website design, you've got the uploads, you've got the curation, the keywords, and then you have the promo, and then you have the fulfillment. It's multi layered. And in the past, this has been very segmented in the online photo sale world. However, Art Storefronts has come up with really, again, a game changing solution for me. And ultimately, it's getting me a lot of results with not a lot of stress and not a lot of work. Let's be honest. I'm very busy, and while I love having my photos online, managing, curating, and especially fulfilling the orders can be a really time consuming thing. So again, enter Art Storefronts. They are an all in one solution for not just immaculate, beautiful website design, but they have this service as part of their package where you can just upload images via Dropbox and a little Google form, and they do all the curation, all the organization, all the naming, keywording for you. In addition, they have a huge part of their business, which is the promotion of your artwork. So, again, not just a beautiful website that shows and displays and keywords things, but they also excel at the marketing end of things. They actually will give you at the start of each month a full marketing calendar that shows you what social posts they're going to help out with, what blogs, what emails. It is just a huge, huge suite of services they offer. Art Storefronts is a really, really great company. They're a great partner of the podcast. And like I said, it's been a big change, big level up for me in my photography. With the new year comes new opportunities to photograph and grow as a photographer yourself. So if you mention this podcast when contacting Art Storefronts, that would just be via artstorefronts.com. You mention this podcast and you're going to get a free website build. That's right. It's almost like a $2,000 value, and they're going to do that part for free. And I think it's a really big way to, once again, level up your photography, primarily in the way you sell your photography, promote your artwork. And again, highly recommend you check them out.
You got to live the life of a photographer. You've got to be a photographer. It's not a choice where you say, "Oh, I just want to be a photographer." It's something within you. It's a lifestyle because it's not the road to riches. Although I'll give one quote that I have said during my career to all the people I work with: "Don't shoot stock, buy stock." So if you can save money and start a financial fund, even if it's $50 a month, if you're starting out when you're 20 and put it in an index fund, and this is off the topic, but you'll be making money in the background and learning investing. And then you can live this life. And then when you get hopefully 20 years younger than I am, when you're in your 50s, you'll be able to dial it back and really go into photography. for yourself. So to make it, um, start locally, have a specialty, and align yourself with, maybe with an organization. You know, if you're into conservation and wildlife, you want to align yourself with an organization or a nonprofit that's doing that kind of work. And then out of that, travel stories might come out of that. But you've got to be shooting what you like. What do you want to spend time doing? I mean, there are people that they were born to be wedding photographers. They love weddings. You know, they like the organization. I'm working with a little team, doing the video. And that brings up to, if you're going to make it as a one man band now, and Bob Chris is the best example of this. He's doing it and he's in his 70s, and that is doing video. It's You're going to transition from being a still photographer to a videographer to make it on some level. Having a teaching side of your business, so multiple revenue streams, you need that. So, teach local workshops, get a local following, Sierra Club outings, REI, align with someone that's doing the type of travel that you like to do. There is a career out there for now with all these companies going to the ends of the earth on all these ships. Lindblad Expeditions, Sven Lindblad and his dad, they started the whole industry, and now it's a career not only for mariners and people that work on these moving hotels, but for the guide, natural habitat. That don't own any ships, but now they've aligned themselves with Lindblad National Geographic. So, there's a company with multiple revenue streams as well. If you want to be a travel photographer, you got to travel. You're not going to be able to afford to travel on your own, um, unless the other option is, I mean, a lot of photographers are very lucky because, their families did well and they have a trust fund for travel maybe. So they don't have as much pressure, which is great. I envy that. But with that comes a lot of responsibility to do good work. Um, to be the most successful photographer now, especially starting out, is to have another job and combine maybe your education with the opportunities to photograph. To have a job, so then you can either live in a place where you can have time to go out, um, and then craft it. I met when I was still plugging around my 4x5, not knowing what I was doing. I met two or three different photographers that I bumped into. One in the canyons, that's guy Tom Allgaier in the canyon, and he was Capitol Reef, and then Larry Ulrich at Sedona, and one other guy I met, not remembering right now who that was. No, Jeff Gaddis. And he said, so, I'm like 21 and they must have been in their 30s, they were old and stuff. And they were, big time calendar photographers. And they just said, if you're still doing it in 10 years, you'll make it. 10 years. Give yourself 10 years. And I was working as a geologist and then I was building fence, I guess. But anyway, yeah, it's a road and it's a great path and it's rewarding, but you're not doing it because you want to make money. You're doing it because you love it and you love to travel and you love to be in the moment. And then working with your phone, it's not all travel. I mean, maybe 60% you're out doing what you love. 40% of the time you're planning the next trip, processing images, submitting them. Yeah. You got to get them online. And that comes to, I mean, I don't think I've put a photo on my website in 10 years because of Instagram. That's kind of your log of what you're shooting, and only show your best work. And there's another thing, the more emotionally you're attached, I waited for that moose to come out in that meadow all morning long and it finally came, but it still wasn't a good shot, right? The moose is there, but the magic didn't happen for whatever reason. So that's why at Nat Geo, when you send in your stuff for a story, you send in every picture, even the shots of your feet. Um, because the editors, they feel they know, the best work will come out, and it might not be what you thought it was because you're too emotionally attached to one situation.
It's so true. I can't tell you how many times I've submitted photos and, I'll submit hundreds at a time to various groups and publications. And the ones that they choose or publish or somehow highlight are not the ones I would have thought. In fact, they were at like the bottom rung of my categorization level, being like, I could probably delete this one. I certainly shouldn't submit it, but I end up submitting it, and then boom, there it is, and I'm so glad I did. So yeah, it's a lot of important lessons there. This next one's just kind of a fun one, but I'm just curious your thoughts, kind of a thought experiment. I think that there are a handful of kind of celebrity photographers today. I'm thinking of like the sort of household names, or at least household if you're into photography, like the Peter Licks, the Thomas Mangelsons, the Franz Lantings. Do you think it's possible to become one of those today? I mean, even if you're 5 years into your photographic journey, like you're not just picking up a camera for the first time today. Like, is that because I don't know how I'd answer that, to be honest. Like, I don't know if I would say, yeah, I think it's still possible if you do this, this, and this. Just curious your thoughts.
Um, it's interesting you mentioned Tom Mangelson because there's an example of a guy, and when I was starting the photo expeditions for Lindblad Expeditions, before we were aligned with Nat Geo, people don't realize that it predated the alliance by 4 years. I invited Tom Mangelson. I invited Tim Davis and Renee Lynn and other photographers that I had admired to come be like the guest photographer. And Tom, having Tom come on, and here's this, the lowest key guy, but he shot what he believed, right? And he didn't like game farming. There's a number of photographers that made their life shooting wildlife and game farms, and they say, "Well, that way I'm not chasing the real animals, but the animals don't have a good will." So, he kinda led that battle. He lived in Tetons, Yellowstone, and everyone knows about, his documentation of books that he knew in his backyard. I mean, it happened to be 399, he knew that bear for almost 30 years. So he's a great example. So, yes, you can become that by doing, maybe a similar model, documenting something over time and having a project and walking the walk, you know? I admire the Buddhists when we go, like to Nepal and the dock and stuff because the people there, they just walk the walk, every morning. And that's what you have to do. No one spends more time in the field than Tom Angelson. Joel Sartori, there's another one. Um, Great photographer, funny guy, and he'll tell you, I didn't want to be a photographer. I just, I didn't want to travel, and then something happened. And he's been going around, shooting endangered species and all the species of the world, basically, in zoo settings, with white backgrounds. Nothing more remarkable than images like that of rare animals. So yes, you can do it, but it's hard. You got to stick with it. It's longevity. Um, Franz Lanting, he was always pushing it. He brought a step ladder to Antarctica to get a different view. Pre-drone. That's the other thing. Drone photography. It's changing. I have shunned having a drone just because I don't need another distraction. It would take me away from what I love doing. Um, I employed drones, yeah, usually either traded to get footage, like when I went to the volcano in Iceland, there was this pilot from Germany, and, we bought his video and used it in our marketing. So if I was young, it would you'd have to be using a drone. Bob Christ, he is using a drone in his filming. So he learned it from some young kids. So yes, it's longevity that's gonna, make it there. It's not gonna be one award winning picture. The other thing, I haven't spent time submitting to contests either. I mean, that's a way if you have something really unique, submit to the top one. While it's photographer of the year, those BBC type contests. But that's a way of motivating yourself. I've met actually was on a Nat Had trip. I met a guy. I roomed with him actually. He won it in a contest. He submits to contests, but it's not just photo contests, it's the ones where, you tell all your friends, "Vote for me," and so he gets this following going and, he travels on his contest winning. So there's lots of little hacks to make it work, but to aspire to a higher level, requires you are a photographer, you're living that life, you're doing what's true to your heart, you're doing what you love and pleases you, and just, live the life and you where it leads you.
The step ladder to Antarctica thing is something that's gonna stick in my mind now. That
They
is
probably had it on a ship, but anyway, yeah, but taking it ashore was a
yeah,
yeah.
but it's clever, actually. I mean, certainly pre-drone, I mean, yeah, you get up 10 feet higher than everybody else, and you're getting a different shot. You throw an ultra wide angle lens on, and like, holy cow, that it's a shot that won't be seen without that. So yeah, that's a really interesting lesson to kind of pass on and to think about, what are the tools at your disposal about positioning yourself that might exist? Because like you're probably right. Like the step stool, the step ladder probably was just in the bay, it was just in the gear room or something. And he's like, "Hey, can I take that ashore for, an hour?" And then boom, he probably got some extraordinary shots. So like what are the tools that are not obvious that might actually, well, literally elevate your photography? So I want to switch to some kind of technique questions, or at least one question here. So you do a lot of expedition photography in polar regions. What are like one or two lessons that are specific to polar regions or maybe ship-based adventures that you could share to aspiring photographers out there? Like what is it about those areas that might have something you wouldn't be thinking of that's a challenge or an opportunity for polar-based ship expeditions or polar expeditions in general?
Yeah, well, most of mine have been ship-based, although I've been seeing this camp on in Antarctica where you can fly in, they have tents, and then you get a sled to draw your gear over to the emperors and get time to the emperor. Anyway,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
but
I've seen
so I
that.
aspire to that. But,
Yeah, the White
yeah, that's
Continent
one
is
thing
what it is
when
for listeners that wanna
people
look that up. The White
when
Continent, I think, or is that what it's called? White Con or is it the White Desert? White Desert
either way,
Expeditions?
yeah.
One of those. Anyway, sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, so most of mine have been ship-based expeditions, and, you know, and this fits in a little bit with the fact that guiding and photographing and knowing what to shoot, now I'm shooting, I've got people with me all the time, right? I'll say, "That's a great shot." She'll go, "I was standing right next to you when I made this shot." Yeah, that's right, yeah, we're in a group, so, um, photographing with people, so that's a challenge because you're on a ship, but being you have to be out on deck. You've gotta be out all the time, you gotta know your equipment, and then you wanna keep your cameras cold. You can't take your cold camera into your take a shower with your camera and get with all the condensation, so there's what and you need lots of batteries, so obviously that's things like so being compact, having a good backpack where you're not fumbling with your gear, and you really need to have 2 to take to the next level, have 2 camera bodies. One where you can have your long lens, one where you've got your and I believe in zooms. There's people I know coming back to primes, but I like to be able to and if I was in a rainforest, I'd want it fast enough. I was just in Borneo with 2 top naturalist biologist type photographers, and they just have their 600 or 800 on one, and that's what they shoot with because, when they're leading a group, they do great macros at other times with lights. So knowing your equipment and being compact, having 2 cameras, a good harness, a little good black rapids, so your cameras are hanging and it's not around your neck. You don't wanna be changing lenses, fumbling with gear when, things are fleeting. We're watching a polar bear with a mom and the young cub nursed and then rolled over and they walked to the edge of the ice and started playing with this piece of ice. And it just happened for a second. And most of our guests, because I taught them, about the moment. But if you were fumbling with your lens or trying to switch lenses because, you wanted a tighter shot, you would have missed it. Um, the cold isn't as much of a factor if you're prepared for it. Good gloves, of course. So I have a Miller Mitt type Hestra gloves. I think they're Norwegian. They're Swedish and Norwegian, so they're windproof and then have it's like Miller Mitt, so they've got cut off fingers and the mitten part comes over it, so you can always get to your fingers. You could have liners in there, and then you can put the hand warmers, so you cheat. You get things that keep you warm, put hand warmers in the mitten part, and when between shots, you're warming your fingers. So there's ways to be ready, but wind is the enemy in the Arctic regions. It's really hard to shoot in the wind. And I would say now a way to going along with simplification is, um, if you can't abandon any tripod situation, especially when you're around wildlife in polar regions, usually light's not as much as a factor. If it is a factor, digital, it's ISO now. You can have publishable images at 12,500 ISO. But the new it's talking about AI. The way AI now cleans up noise and photos, it's should be illegal, but I just consider it magic now that you can shoot in almost you can shoot in the dark. Literally, you can shoot in the dark with these cameras. So knowing your equipment, dressing for the weather, embracing the weather. Remember the bad weather situations. Being out on deck, going to Antarctica, splashing waves, albatross through the waves. Um, yeah, I was always out on deck. So because I get seasick, so I'd just get back. Not that where I'd be sick, but if I was inside trying to work on my computer, I'd be dead to the world. But if I'm out feeling the motion, looking at the waves, shooting, fine. So be active. When you're on a ship, it's very easy to get lazy and wait for the next announcement of things. But if you're out with things, especially with marine mammals, you just have to be out. Be out on deck at the time.
Yeah, I want to underline something you said early on in your response to that question is, with polar environments and the cold air outside and the warm air inside, don't shower with your camera. That's the that's what I took away from that. No,
That's right.
it is yeah, just as an aside, but this is a really important thing if you haven't heard of it for the listeners is when you are in super cold environments, and generally it's really the discord between how hot it is inside and how humid it is inside versus how cold it is outside. So I can't say, might, below 32 Fahrenheit, this happens. It could happen even warmer than that, but usually it's when it's a bit colder than that. And what happens is your camera just becomes a super cooled chunk of metal or plastic. And then when you come into the warm air, it actually condenses all the gaseous humidity that's inside. Part of that's because of the heat. Part of that's because you have a bunch of people inside breathing, and it's kind of like when you take a Coke can out of the cooler in a humid beach on a warm summer day, and it just
Mhm.
condenses. And so that's what happens, and then you now have a foggy lens. And then the worst thing happens is when you see something out the window or you get an announcement and you take that now foggy lens back outside, and now you have frozen condensation on your lens. So it's a whole heap of trouble. And so you kind of quickly mentioned this, but I want to underline this as well as just having like a good camera bag that you can stash your camera in and just keep it outside the whole time. Like I get it. You may not want to keep your camera just on the deck. It might be wet or icy, snow. You might be passing through a snowstorm, but just having some sort of good rugged camera bag can be such a big difference, and I've actually been talking about this in the last few episodes where I'm finding that to be one of my favorite pieces of gear. It's just a bomb-proof bag that I do not mind leaving outside. I do not mind throwing it on the muddy ground or whatever. So that could be a really, really big game changer out there, especially with polar photography. The same thing actually happens, you mentioned Borneo. The same thing
It's the
happens
other
with
way.
tropical photography. Yeah, exactly. And
From
so
the AC going, yep. So you got to let your
mhm,
gear equilibrate. And every time I
mhm.
say that to groups, they say, "Is that a word?" Yes, it is a word. And so
Yeah.
so there's times where I keep the camera bag outside the room and use, on trips, especially in humid regions, that'll be kind of the way things are. And people keep their stuff outside their rooms. Let your camera bag cool down before you just run out. If it has been sitting inside all night, yeah, that's
Mhm.
important. The other thing too is the umbrella. Carry an umbrella, but all the time. Um, it's really helps you shoot. It's really functional when it's raining, and sometimes for sun. But yeah, I always have an umbrella for that. And so, going back to bags and equipment, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into equipment, but I've simplified that so I don't have the compartmentalized mind spring bag and everything that I take around and I take it out and everything's separate. I have my 2 cameras and my lenses on it, extra lenses in the bottom, and I use rugged. I think it's no, is it overboard or rugged? I can't remember. I think it might be overboard. Um, fully waterproof bag with a roll top, almost like for going on a river. And then I'll have, I think overboard, they even make a like a little cube, zippered cube for when you travel. So when you do take things off, you can put it back away, but you can have that your extra lenses in the bottom. So I have my and with that bag in a Zodiac or on deck, the lenses are attached. So I've got 300 to 1000 millimeters on one lens if I have my big lens, but usually I've got 200 to 800 and what, 24 to 200 on the other camera. And they're there. And all I have to do is pop the bag open, pull it out, and I'm ready. Black rapid straps. If I'm walking around the deck, both cameras are there, weights off the shoulders. Um, Polarizers, filters. People always think about that too. Polarizers only when you're trying to cut reflections on the water to see marine mammals or working with the sky, or reflections in rainforest and things on the leaves, shoot it with and without. Filters are definitely overrated, especially now with all the digital things you can do.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm getting the ringing tone of simplicity in your work, and I definitely do wanna dive into gear. I know a bit about your gear, but before we get into the kinda gear talk here, I wanted to ask a question about photo style, and it's something I'm kind of moderately obsessed with because I feel like my style has changed throughout the years, and I'm not sure if that serves me best. And if I were to wave a magic wand, I probably should have thought for days or months or a whole year about what kind of style I wanted, and I just stuck with it the whole time because it kind of becomes your brand and your identity. And when I say style, I'm not talking about, shooting top down shots or eye level wildlife shots. I'm thinking more of like kind of the color temperature, the palette, what you do with contrast. Are your images really big and bold and colorful? Are they more muted and dark and moody? And there's no right answer because they're all beautiful styles. And, of course, if you're trying to go for a certain type of publication or a certain type of portfolio, you gotta do one or the other or a certain thing that's being asked of you. But in terms of just general photo style, I'm wondering if you can talk about what the Ralph Lee Hopkins photo style is and why. And I'll give you a quick primer on the follow up question, or at least the second question, because sometimes I think nowadays they definitely go hand in hand. Is I wanted to get a glimpse into your editing style, and again, they're similar, but a lot of it comes out in the shoot in camera. And editing is a little bit of a cherry on top in some cases. But yeah, the basic question is, what is the Ralph Lee Hopkins photo style, and maybe a bit about why.
Feel like I should ask AI to tell me because I really don't know how I would describe my style and how other people describe it. Um, and I guess the images that are published, I mean, they are colorful, they are bold, they're sharp. You know what the subject is. Strong compositions, good light, strong compositions, and usually a combination of things happening in an image, which I always like. If it's a strong foreground, having a rear. I'm looking around the room here that I got into my new office here, in my gallery garage, and I'm looking at them, and they're really, they're bold. They're bold images. They're not subtle. And you look back at Elliot Porter's shot, have a fall scene. And there's so many branches and so many leaves, and that was, it gave a feeling. So I think I shoot that way sometimes when I'm in a forest. But what I resonate is with the really strong landscapes that have great clouds, great color, fall color, um, and have a strong compositional element. The river going through the Grand Canyon with, cactus in the foreground and beautiful light. Again, I was probably criticized by the Nat Geo editors 'cause they're too they can tend to be too perfect. I try to simplify. I mean, I talk about simplifying, and that's the number one thing. If you can simplify your scene, you're gonna make a better picture, and that could be getting closer or zooming in or getting down a little lower or using I mean, my first 20 years of shooting digital cameras, I didn't have a flip out screen like the amateurs had. I was shooting Canon, and I'm like, "Why don't you make us this?" So that's when I did switch to Olympus for a number of reasons. So style, I mean, for nature and wildlife photographers, the style you can tell the photographers who spent a lot of time out. And I think at least the things that I know of, and I've been, Antarctica, I don't know, 50 times, the Arctic 50 times. You start shooting more of less things because you know what's good rather than capturing it all. I remember the first time friend photographer Kevin Shaver said that to me. He goes, "Yeah, I'm just shooting more image of fewer subjects because you're honing in now to what works." So, and I do the other thing that all my students accuse me of, why is it you're always in the right place at the right time, standing in the right spot? And and that's why I don't like crowds. You go to Maroon Bells in Colorado, to shoot it, and it's like everyone's lined up there, but the photo I wanted to take was like it's over there. So I'm not seeing what everyone else is seeing. Probably because of a foreground element or a tree that pokes through the horizon of the mountain. There's some little thing. So there's if someone else was looking at critiquing, they might, if they really know composition, I guess they would look and say, "Oh, that's why that cat." And I'm looking up at a Grand Canyon image here in my office. That one cactus that is breaks the rules, that is in the middle, is in a beautiful background spot where it should be, where it stands out so that your eye goes to it, and then you explore. So long, long a long answer to I don't know what my style is.
Well, it was a
I
long
guess it's
question
okay.
too. Yeah, no, that's A-okay. I'm wondering if you can parlay that with a little bit of your editing. I don't wanna say techniques, I don't wanna make you go through every little thing that you might possibly ever do, but your general take on editing. Are there certain sliders you always use, some that you don't touch, any X factor things within Lightroom or Photoshop that you might say, "You know what? I found this one little thing that does this thing that I don't think a lot of people know about." Any thoughts on those when it comes to the editing and processing part of photography?
Well, this is the thing of, I think, going back to your other thing, where is photography going?
I'd like to take a quick break to thank one of the sponsors of the podcast, and we'll be right back to the show. So, printing your photography is a really big differentiator. I think a lot of people are kind of stuck in the digital world and they have these huge catalogs and backlogs of photography, yet they never make the decision to actually print their pieces off. Or if they do, they may not know where to turn. They want to print in a really big, grandiose way, or just have really high quality small prints for postcards, you name it. Enter Bay Photo. So Bay Photo is a wonderful photo printing lab. I mean, it really is like a lab because there's a ton of science behind it. And they're who I use personally to print off my work. And they just do it all. They're a really easy company to work with when you upload your photos and select things like frames if you want to add those to the type of paper you use. And again, they have some pretty next level options on their website, whether it's choosing different types of gloss or matte finishes to the paper, or it's just using a totally different type of medium in general, like printing on metal or canvas or any number of things they offer. So I highly recommend not only do you consider printing your work because it's incredibly gratifying and it's really a great way to learn the process if you want to grow as a photographer, just getting to see your work in the flesh is such a huge level up, and Bayphoto is my top choice of who to use. If you use promo code TWP25, you will get 25% off any one wall display order with that promo code. This is going to include metal prints and acrylic prints, frame prints, epic prints, canvas wraps, and so much more. You can also go to bayphoto.com/the wild photographer to create your next high impact display today. Again, huge fans of Bay Photo, amazing work that they do, and I do recommend you checking them out.
Where is photography going? And it's really has to do with you're out there and you're captured. Now what can you do to you made this image for a reason, and now I'm not talking about a marketing image or anything like that. I'm just talking about a scene. How can you make that image the best it can be? It's a strong composition. Well, the first thing is you have to, if you're taking it to the next level, and I have a couple of photographers who will debate this, you need to shoot in RAW because you're getting the basic, you're getting this digital negative with all the best information, and your camera is not processing. iPhone processes every picture, but now you can shoot in RAW. It's been a couple of years, but on an iPhone, you can get a raw image out of that, and you can put that into so taking it into Lightroom. So I'm not a master at Lightroom. I know what to do for my images, and every time I see someone else do a demonstration and teach, I learn 2 or 3 tricks, and you're gonna have the gearheads, the real techies that say you have to do it in an order. to preserve your pixels. I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe it probably is. But we're too hypercritical now of our images on the technical side because we can look at things at 100% on a beautiful high resolution monitor. Whereas before we used to look at, oh, with an 8X and go, oh, yeah, that looks sharp. So, oh my God, your corners are sharp in that. I read that the corners are sharp in this, or blurry in the wide angle lens, and fall off in light. Well, that's true, but that can be processed. So you'll have to learn how to process your picture now. So that's where it's going, or have someone that knows how to do it really well, but you're going to do it to your liking. So I don't, because I shoot a lot of moving things, I don't do the HDR thing where I'm sandwiching, and I haven't gotten into. I've done two skies. I think when I got the comment, I learned how to stack images, and I'd like to do more of that now that we'll be traveling less, where you're stacking things for night sky shots and light painting. But I discovered Olympus cameras that have a lot of software in them that can do some amazing things. So what I look for in my own work is I have to use Photo Mechanic for my first quick edit because it's really fast. It gives you big images you can just click through. And I just delete probably 60% of what I just shot before I even take it into Lightroom. Uniquely number every image, and I have a very simple, so you gotta, adopt a labeling system. So it's just, if it's Arizona or Colorado in 25, it's gonna be CO 25 underscore and a number. All the other information can be highlighted. You can search for it in your metadata or your captions. So just get a simple identify number, work with that. And then I have a quick, it depends whether it's I guess what is it called? Where you can make your own. So I have some settings that it's a quick tweak, and I tweak all the images. So
Preset. Yeah.
I do a preset. Sorry, I do a preset. So color balance and digital color balance is so important because color is not the same. The ground with a beautiful sky reflecting blue is not the same. Your camera picks up, so the ground's gonna be too blue. So you're really making an HDR, that is a high dynamic range image from one image. So I'm working in different areas of the image. So I might tone down the sky, and the color balance that you shot with really doesn't matter, but the sky might look too warm. You want the sky blue. Now you can cheat and select the sky and in Lightroom and just add a little blue, but you don't want to take it too far. So I'm always edging it, pushing the boundaries, and then backing up. Um, it really depends. I'd say I tend towards, a saturation, not oversaturated. It depends on your computer, but a lot of editors or a lot of people still use IBM compatibles or whatever, and they don't have the color rendition that the Mac looks. So if someone looks at my picture on the Mac, it looks a little super saturated. But when you go to a PC, it looks perfect. So they might select that picture. So they can always tone that down. You want it to jump out so someone selects it. It's different than slideshows where you tone it down. And it used to be the screens were so horrible and the projectors were so horrible. Now they're amazing. So I'm balancing the light. I'm gonna crop. First thing I do is I look for sharpness. So those are the things that are gonna be gone. If you blurred it or just blew it, or too many of the ones seen. And I'm always clicking the shutter 3 times. I just do a little burst, even when I'm hand holding. Because there's just times things happen. It gives you a digital dupe right away when you're looking, and it shows you the sequence. But I always, in my method of shooting, since I do a lot of wildlife, you have time when you want to change things, but I'm always, I'm f8 at, I don't know, a thousandth of a second when I pull it out, minus two-thirds on the exposure composition, so I can pull out and start shooting um, in burst mode. And I'm a thumb focuser, so I can tap tap focus, back button focus, and so I can get the bird on it, and then I can recompose and then wait for it to fly. My camera is not focusing while I'm clicking the shutter. I don't want my camera to be focusing when I'm clicking the shutter unless I'm doing a follow focus kind of thing. And the autofocus now in these cameras is just getting so good. It's crazy. So the technology is helping you there. So processing. So then I will. Now we teach to do a star thing where you go through and you do 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars, and then you can get rid of your 1 stars later, and then finally get to your 5 stars. I've been doing it long enough. I know what the sequence is and which one, so I just highlight it yellow for National Geographic and move on. But I use color coding for different um, catalogs or for different submissions. That'll help me sort. But then the key in Lightroom is working in collections. So the way I teach it is, and I hate teaching the workflow side, but I spend a lot of time doing it. Is get all your pic. It's like your playlist in your iPhone. Get all your images and music into your folder, what the one folder, and then have it. I mean, you can have it by day or however it is you shoot. Those folders are transparent in Lightroom. All your pictures are there, and then you're working with it, and then it's collections. You want to start making collections. Do not start moving your original. You want the sequence you shot in to be ironclad. You can go back to it 20 years from now because you may have a different take on that scene. Collections pulls it out, but you can always click on an image and go back to the original folder. So you work in collections. You make these collections. That's the way you edit and organize, rather than moving the actual digital image to a different place, and now they're all scattered. And since I travel to places that I go back to, I have an Antarctic catalog. I have a Baja catalog. I'm not set up for an editor work on my work and go into one catalog and search my whole database. Um, that's what I thought stock agencies were for before that industry crashed. Although it's still important to get with a good stock agency so your images are searchable. People can find you. And we could talk about that on the business side as well. So organizing your work that way, highlight, and then make your. So I have a selects folder, and then I'll have like the portfolio folder. Selects will have all the good ones, and then the portfolio ones are probably going to be the ones that I'm going to post or pull out for Instagram. So you could have Instagram, for example. Now, as far as tweaks on things, it's the holding back and changing luminosity, the brightness of areas, and then highlighting a little bit whatever's the most colorful thing, just a little bit, lightening an eye, 2 clicks. I'm not big on the sharpening thing because most publishers do the sharpening, and a lot of our, talks and online, when you export for showing things online, you're gonna make it smaller, 2000 on the long or something, and you're gonna click high for the screen for sharpening anyway. A lot of people spend a lot of time, and it's different if you're going printing. I'm not talking printing. I love to make prints, and there's great digital labs that do great jobs. But start with really sharp, well composed images, and it is a rabbit hole. You find yourself um, trying to fix things too much in an image. It's time to move on. Usually, good images, the tweaks should be pretty simple.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, I mean, it's if it's something that you have to work a lot to fix or rescue, it better be a pretty amazing moment. And those do happen. And we make lemonade in some cases out of something that might have just not been a great snap, but a super amazing moment.
The other thing is that you're seeing things now, especially with the mirrorless cameras. You're seeing things on your screen, and when I shoot, in digital, you wanna shoot hot. You wanna be as close to overexposing what's white as you can, because you lose a lot of color data when things are too dark in your shadows. So, my images don't look good on my screen, but I've trained my eye how it looks. I'm worried about the focus, my focus point. I'm always on a single focus point unless there's a situation where I change it. I'm gonna nail a focus back button, recompose, shoot, even for a landscape. Third out into the frame to approximate, let's say, a deep depth of field, because 2/3 of your depth of field is behind your focus point. So you find that point. The engineer, I was teaching, you'd have engineers and dentists who do a lot of photography or are very technical. They know their cameras bad. They'll have the depth of field chart taped to their lens. And then they'll tell me, I don't really know how to do composition. And so you can learn that. So there is that balance. It's the right brain, left brain thing to get into balance. And then once you get into Lightroom, so I rarely go into Photoshop because I don't know it anymore. I guess if I was a publisher or printing, there are certain things you can do, and or the layering thing, some of that stuff you've got to go into Photoshop. I need to take another class to do that. Those
Oh,
Santa Fe workshops, or the night guys, Bitterman and those guys, national parks at night, do class with them. Their processing. So I this will sound funny. I kind of resent every moment that I have to sit at the computer with my photography, but I love discovering things and what results. I think I'm way behind now.
well, I want to come back to something you said because that was interesting. You said you oftentimes shoot hotter, or i.e., brighter than you want the ending photo to be, and that's interesting because you can rescue at both ends. I've heard a lot of people say that they will shoot underexposed versus overexposed because you can rescue light more in the darkness. But maybe what you're saying is the color in the light spots is more accurate. So it's a little bit of a give and take. Which parts of the photo do you want to prioritize? The color and the light, or being able to rescue overly dark scenes and bring out kind of, dare I say, the HDR look where you have a very, very dynamic range. So you've had good success with an even exposure or even slightly overexposed, primarily focusing on color, or did I get that wrong?
Well, I'm not. Oh, I'm shooting hot in that you have clouds and you're on the edge of blinkies if you have highlight warnings. I'm not overexposing. I'm
Got it.
just exposing. I'm not trying to make it look good on my LCD screen. And underexposed looks better on your LCD screen. You can't tell exposure by how it looks on your LCD screen in your camera unless you've trained your eye. Um, so the technology's gotten so good that we probably can rescue the shadows. But the way I learned about it is if you tried to pull up, your shadows, you just, it looked like outer space of red and green and all the pixels just blinking back at you from the noise. The software now is so the software now is just so good that you can do that. So that's the way I do it, and I'm pretty fast. And that's from the fact that I go on a trip, shoot, I don't know, 5,000 pictures, but I would have already, because we do talks at night. The fact you can go shoot in the day, come back, pick out your 10 best, and show them in the evening. You've you get pretty good at it. Now, when you're going to the print level or publication, they're going to do different tweaks. Um, for the paper or metal or whatever you're printing on. You got to know the profiles for that. And I'm not an expert in that, but I do want to do a little more things printed. Enjoy my work, my golden years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got a few more questions for you, and I wanted to
Cool.
switch gears here to talk about gear. So what are you shooting on?
All right. So I started out on the Graflex 4x5, went to Linhof 4x5, then went to Pentax 645, and someone gave me a Nikon 35 millimeter, and I had to get lenses for it. So I started shooting Nikon 35 millimeter. And then I went Canon because Nikon dragged their feet on autofocus, and their first 80 to 400 autofocus lens was horrible lens. So I switched to Canon, and I was sticking with Canon. I loved Canon. I can't even remember the numbers of the cameras anymore. Um, and then my friend Jay Dickman, who is the Nat Geo photographer, man, you should go Olympus. Smaller, the technology in them, sharp lenses. They make microscopes. Da da da. And I was like, "Oh, I'm using it. I still have my big camera. I can't invest in another system." And then my friend Michael Nolan, he went Olympus. I said, "God, it's great." And so, um, called to talk to Olympus. We had this program on the ship, and I said, "You wanna be involved with the ship? And can I try some of your cameras?" And got a couple of loaners. Next thing I know, bought a whole bag of cameras. Now, they're Micro Four Thirds, which is a smaller sensor. And so when I talk to others, they say, "Oh, but that small sensor, the quality." I'm like, "It's a full frame sensor. It's just smaller." Their lenses are designed so that every photon comes in perfectly perpendicular. These engineers are great. And it's kind of like the Tesla model camera software, they can upgrade the software in your camera to improve the results if you have good glass. So they concentrated on having the sharpest lenses possible for their cameras. So, I mean, what other camera can focus on the stars and do a live composite? Let's say you want to do star trails and it starts making a live composite, however you said it, and then you could see it and say, "Oh, okay, I want to stop it now." And then when you click the shutter to stop it, it processes it into a raw image that you can then take into Lightroom and put noise reduction and everything on it. They were the first ones to have the pre-shoot or the pro mode where you just hold your finger down halfway and it's buffering. You're waiting for the whale to jump or the bird to fly. Y- Then the bird flies through the frame, then you click it and it will store, depending on how many, it'll store 50 shots before the action happened. That's another game changer. I mean, it does, yes, does it feel like cheating? But you're using technology to capture a moment. Um, you used to say if you see the leaping dolphin in your camera, you missed it, right? Because the blackout, with some of these modes now, you get no blackout following a bird as it goes by. So the technology in that camera, they're smaller. So, my 200 to, not in here though, but my 200 to 800, is the size of someone else's 70 to 200 on a full frame camera. So again, my Bob Chris used to tell me, God, he started going to smaller Sony cameras, and I'm just still lugging around those big Canon lenses. And now I know exactly what he's saying because I have all this technology. My bag's lighter. Those lenses fit right in my overboard or rugged bag, waterproof bag, and they can pull out, and I'm ready to shoot the whales. So yeah, Olympus now they're called OM Systems. So I'm an ambassador for them, and so you have no idea how many photographers now with Lindblad and now Nat Hab are switching. They're trying to encourage pros to start using these cameras because they are good, they are lighter, and when it comes down to it, it's not about what camera you use; it's about knowing the camera you're using. And in many places, the iPhone, again, especially for short videos, um, landscapes. Now the 17 has an 8x, which is like a 200 millimeter. So if you shoot in RAW, you can crop 50% and make a big print for your wall. And you've been carrying around an iPhone, so probably 95%, I think, of the travelers on the ships now are, unless it's a photo trip. I'm sure you see this with Nat Hab too. They're very happy with their iPhone smartphone cameras.
Do you have a favorite lens or lenses that you use for wildlife photography?
Yeah, so for wildlife, I go between there's the white lens that OM has. It's a 150 to 400, but since it's times 2 for the smaller sensor, it's 300 to 800, and then it has a built-in 0.25 extender, which for polar bears shooting from the ship is the lens to have. When I want to be lighter, when I went to Borneo, I took the 100 to 400, which converted as a 200 to 800. Now it's a slow lens. It's 5.6 or whatever, and they zoom out to zero point 0.6. But um, Olympus has 7 stops in the stabilization. I can hand hold in the force. If the animal's not moving, I can hand hold to a 30th of a second. And if I shoot a burst, I'll get 2 or 3 frames that are sharp. It's different if the animals are moving. So not being on a tripod in the rainforest, that was a game changer. And do you miss some shots? Yeah, but you should keep shooting, but you don't have time to set up a tripod and follow gibbons or lemurs or any of those fast moving things. So, yeah, so for yeah, the 100 to 400 when I want to be lighter, and then the kind of all around lens is the 12 to 100, which is a 24 to 200 fixed f4. And that's, kind of the go-to for scenery, or if you're gonna take one lens and walk around, you know, a town or a scene or in a moving boat, that would be the lens to use, or aerial photography because it has such good, image stabilization. But I'm here to tell you, I also love especially just keeping this in the car at all times because we've got a lot of wildlife around here in Colorado, and so if I go take the recycle center, I've got my cameras with me. Um, is there's a kit lens, 12 to 200, 24 to 400, and it's like 4 inches long, zooms a little, and it's light and it's plastic, but it's sharp. So when it's good weather I just want one camera and I don't wanna carry anything else, and I want the just in case something good comes along that I need longer, I'll carry that.
Yeah, I have to say, the more I hear about OM systems, the more tempted I am. The lens lineup, the different ranges, and of course the apertures, the speed of those lenses is pretty remarkable. I remember when I first heard of OM, one of their flagship lenses was the 40 to 150, which is essentially an 80 to 300 f2.8 throughout.
Yep, I get that,
And
yep.
ever since then, I've been hearing about the new ones, this 300 to 800, or technically it's the 150 to 400. But yeah, this is like f4 to 800. I mean, that's incredible for background separation for light. So yeah, one of these days I might have to try one of those systems out for an upcoming trip.
It's interesting you say that, because the drawback, you have twice the depth of field because of the size of the sensor. I still don't know the physics of that, and I would have to go to the diagrams and the circle of confusion or whatever it's called. But so getting that shallow depth of field look, you use a longer lens and stand back, and zoom in on something rather than shooting it like you would with a 2.8. So you do learn some tweaks on that. But I would say for anyone who wants to explore it, um, just for the night sky feature alone, getting the OM1 Mark II body with, say, their 8 millimeter fisheye. That's a I think it's a 1.8 fisheye for star photography. Um, that's the way, even if that's all you use it for is astro, it would pay for itself just from it focuses on the stars. It's paranoid enough, yeah, going through the zoom in, zoom out, and when your eyes get, yeah, it's hard to tell. I could never tell really it was hard for me to tell when the stars were in focus. You had to really work at it.
Yeah, that is an art in itself. Okay, so couple last final questions. One is, so I view photography, as I think you do, as indeed a conservation tool, because we're both photo guides and we go to these natural areas and we're creating a love and ambassadorship of these animals and the natural landscapes, like that has that potential. Is there anything that you use photography for as a conservation tool, or any thoughts on that that might give the listeners some insight as to how they themselves could also use photography as a conservation tool? Maybe obvious, maybe something we're not thinking about.
Well, I mean, the first thing you need to do is identify what you're interested in and the place you care about. And I got into it because I mean, I actually had a benefactor that I met on a trip, and he came up to me. He says, "What do you really care about? I want to support your photography. If you had a grant, what would you do?" And so ask yourself that question. If you had a grant to do something, what is it you'd want to do? And at that time, there were plans for like 80 resorts or something in Baja California and Galapagos, the pressure for overfishing and tourism, building a new airport. These things were all on and it's like, well, I would try to tell the story about how special Baja is, that it's not just Cabo and we don't need more resorts and 40 more golf courses in the desert. And then Galapagos, that people live there, and there's a balance and a battle between fishing for livelihood and tourism and Ecuadorians from the mainland trying to come to Galapagos for its desirable job and lifestyle. So I wanted to tell that story. So you've got to figure out what you're passionate about, and then I mean you're probably already thinking, okay, what are the organizations that are doing work there? So it might be something close to home. You live on the coast in San Diego, and the Tijuana River is a constant problem there, and you start documenting what's going on there with that. So when I got this grant, what I did was I researched the organizations, and for Baja, I called a group called Wild Coast. They're based in San Diego, and they called me back, and they said, "We have one." one rule here, major rule here is that when media calls interested in what's going on, we call them back. And so they were basically my guides on who to talk to and set up the whole thing, and that led to, a story in Traveler magazine, but the Baja boom, and the things that were going on down there. So finding the organization that you can work with, and sometimes you have to volunteer. It's not gonna be the economic thing. It's like you're gonna trade photos for access, for example, and always have an agreement that limits the use of the photos through the projects that they're working on. Um, and that's just a good guide all along is that and I've fought this battle with Lindblad and Nat Geo, trying to, it's like, we're giving images or selling images for you to use for your brochures, but when it goes to Audubon magazine, you know, they should be buying them. You can't be giving them away. So you want a good business agreement on that. It's got to be what your passion is, whether it's land, animals. Yep, that's how, and then it's the storytelling is, and that's the next step that you have to learn. Is it's not just okay. We want to save the whales. Here's the perfect picture of the whales. Um, one of the most impactful images I have from Southeast Alaska are the whales bubble net feeding right in front of a fishing boat. So now you have the whales that are feeding on the same thing as the fishing boat is feeding on in the same waters, or the krill shots. We came across one of the largest concentrations of fin whales post whaling. There were, we figured, 2 to 3,000 feeding in this one krill area, and the krill boats were right there on the edge of this protected area, siphoning up the krill 24 hours a day. And we still don't know what the carrying capacity of krill is in the Southern Ocean. And then, so it's being managed, but without any really knowledge of what the long term effects are. So it's those storytelling images where you're combining. It's not just the perfect, beautiful image juxtaposed to, and I'm sure you can remember during the clear cutting, and this is probably coming back now with plans for increasing cutting of lands on our national forests, is a clear cut shot of a clear cut and a perfect forest side by side. I remember a shot by Art Wolf in Washington State that illustrated that. Just destruction on one side and the beautiful forest in the same image. So learning to seek out and take the time to make those shots when you'd rather be, who knows, sitting with your tripod waiting for the sun to set.
Excellent advice. Okay, so my penultimate question: what would the Ralph of today tell the Ralph just starting out?
When I look back at the way I probably spent too much, well, I didn't know the technology was going to change. I didn't think my old file cabinet there of all those labeled 35 millimeter slides and medium format slides and 4 by 5 slides would basically have no value. I mean, some of the images have value. I mean, they're going to have value to me because I'm going to make legacy books of my travels. So I was lucky because I did follow what I liked. And, I quit a job as a geologist to go on a river trip. So I think I would be telling myself the same thing, is that you did well, you took risks. But I think what I probably missed is I didn't figure out my specialty soon enough, or my markets soon enough, but I was making money being a guide. So I didn't have the pressure to support my entire living by selling images. I was guiding, teaching workshops. That was the other thing. Doing workshops. I, I was lucky that I started that. When 9/11 happened, I switched I said, man, this travel could go away. I need to start teaching workshops. And I remember when Joel Satori told all the photographers at Nat Geo, the value of images are almost gone. Start teaching. And so, um, the advice would be still to take those risks, but to focus a little more on the what you enjoy doing, and then the marketing side of it being specialized. And if it's in today's world, you got to be more technical. You've got to get. shoot, learn video, learn how to put together video and use drones or partner with someone. And that's the other thing that I did and what I would tell not my I was pretty good at this, I think collaborating, but to say to someone else, "Don't try to guard your silo of what you do, you want to collaborate." Everything that's happened to me is because I've talked to someone and I was open about it, and I wanted to help someone else, and then the next thing you know, I mean, that was the great thing about working in Lindblad when we started photo expeditions, and then and I got criticized for this, we created the Nat Geo position, that helped create, and I said, "Why would you invite other photographers to the places that you go and shoot?" But by meeting, working with Paul Nicklin and Joel Satori and Mark Thiessen, who's still the only, I think, full-time salaried photographer at Nat Geo, you just learn so much and you learn about their passion and how they approach things. You realize, well, maybe assignments aren't for you, that you have a pretty good job. And that's what Joel kept tells all photographers when they complain, anyone complaining about something, said, "Do you love your job?" Well, yes. Well, then you navigate it to make it work for you. But I think having a specialty that you're kind of known for and that you can market, even if it's small, local. A friend that we basically taught photography on the ship. They retired from finance and they become great photographers. He lives in Key West and he's like the main man for all the events. He shoots everything. He has websites. He's not doing it for money. He's doing it for love, and he's having a fun retirement, just making fun images. Now, following your passion, I'll leave it with this. I mean, Bob Chris would say, inspiration is for amateurs. If you're sitting around waiting to get inspired, you're just probably gonna sit there. You've gotta get out and start doing something, and it's the same thing with passion. Following your passion and everything will follow. Well, not really. You've gotta be persistent, but you have to identify what it is that you're passionate about, then get good at it, and then follow it, take chances, collaborate, cold call, cold call people. When Nansen went to Greenland, he cold called every and visited every Arctic explorer he could and learned their secrets and knew not to take horses across Greenland. You know, you want to ski and have a sail and a sledge. Another long-winded Ralph Lee Hopkins answer.
No, that was great. Excellent, excellent advice. I would have expected nothing else. All right, so the last question is an easy one. Where can people find you? Or if they want to follow along the adventures of Ralph Lee Hopkins in your photography?
Well, I gotta say, you can say what you want about Facebook, but they're a juggernaut, and they went on a limb and bought Instagram for $1 billion, and now it's probably worth a trillion. Yeah, post your best work, and I do that on Instagram, and then it immediately goes to Facebook as well. And you can message me. Message me though on Facebook because I don't check the message. I'm not good at. There's too many. There's Threads. There's Instagram. There's Facebook. There's texts. There's emails. I don't know where to. I know someone wrote me, but where did they write me? But that's where they'd find me. Instagram. I try to be. I'm not religious about it, and I think my last posts were Borneo, and I'm never real time. I've had people meet me in like Yellowstone. You were in Hawaii. I said, never real time.
Well, excellent. Well, I'll be sure to put your handle in show notes. And that brings us to the end. Ralph, this is a pleasure. I knew it was gonna be a good one. Learned a lot, enjoyed the conversation, and just a very sincere thanks for your time today.
I really enjoyed it. It was an honor to you're good at what you do. I love these podcasts, so I'll be listening.
Thanks, Ralph.